Gentlelady is recognized.
Before I really begin, I want to make clear that what the President said in his statement of disapproval and veto, that he would not negotiate over this foolish bill, that he was not going to negotiate what to do if we go into default, because his intent, as well as the intent of the Democrat Party, is not to default. It's right honest, but instead of really talking about today lifting the debt limit, we're going to discuss the usual do-nothing legislative agenda. Let's fiddle while Rome burns and pass a one-house bill that the Senate will never touch and the President will ever see, which is what we do here at least once, sometimes twice a week. But today, I think they've really outdone themselves. Instead of wasting time on a bill that could be characterized as redundant, like we do the 35-6 times that we vote against health care, the majority is now considering legislation that treads into the realm of the precarious. Regardless of whether the legislation before us is approved by this chamber, the very fact the majority is proposing policies to manage the economic default is by itself a threat to our economy. Both the Treasury and outside experts have made clear that picking and choosing which debts we pay is legally questionable and logistically impossible. The President has, as my colleague said, warned that in highly unlikely event that this bill reaches his desk, he will unequivocally veto it. But instead of listening to this fact, the majority is moving ahead with a proposal and a debate that puts us on the road to default. They do so even as the Washington Post reports this morning that the economy is improving, revenues are up, and spending is down, which undermines this stream of doom that we hear. But today, the irresponsible actions of the majority are once again needlessly endangering the economic recovery. Let me be clear, the legislation does not raise the debt ceiling, which is the only way to take away the threat of default. But instead, the bill guarantees that when we hit the debt ceiling, our foreign creditors and the Social Security Trust Fund will be paid in full, while the well-being of millions of Americans and vendors and people we owe legitimate debts to are left to chance. Under this legislation, the majority is actively putting the interests of China before millions of Americans, including active military service members, veterans, and even the men and women who clean the floors of the Capitol and fold napkins in the members' dining room. Every single one of these citizens rely upon their paycheck and upon the United States government to pay the debts in order to put the food on their tables and to make ends meet. With today's bill, the majority is proposing that the welfare of these Americans be left to chance while they protect China and foreign bondholders from the threat of default. In addition, the majority is endangering the regular payments owed to infrastructure projects, to food safety inspectors, education programs, public health research, a reckless plan that would directly hurt the most vulnerable members of society who already struggle in this sequestration to get by. Furthermore, the act of choosing who we will repay when we default on our debt is and of itself an act that will threaten to throw our economy back into recession. During a recent hearing of the Committee on Ways and Means, the MIT economist Simon Johnson warned that if we default on even a portion of our debt, the unemployment rate would more than double, countless companies would go out of business, and investors would flee the United States. Meanwhile, The Economist magazine has written, quote, failure to raise the debt ceiling would force immediate spending cuts equal to 6% of GDP. Not only would that threaten to send the economy back into recession, it would also deprive doctors, pensioners, contractors, millions of others the money needed to meet their own obligations and set off a chain reaction of defaults. Even a few days' default would roil the global financial system, which relies on treasuries in countless transactions. The mere possibility could incite skittish investors to dump their holdings, driving up interest rates, end quote. Tony Fratto, a former spokesperson for President George W. Bush, said, quote, prioritization is impossible. Is the government really going to be in the position of withholding benefits, salaries, rent, contractual payments, and so forth in order to pay off Treasury bondholders? That would be a political catastrophe, end quote. It should be clear by now that the act of even bringing a bill such as this to the floor for debate can scare investors and endanger our economy. This type of economic brinksmanship is extremely dangerous. The majority's games are compounded by their disinterest in repealing the sequester. As we speak, the sequester is preventing thousands of cancer patients from receiving life-saving treatment, keeping thousands more children from receiving the education, I think 70,000 is the figure, through the Head Start program. These are some of the devastating cuts that don't go away simply because the majority refuses to take action and repeal the sequester in full. Tragically, the majority's willingness to endanger our economy is not new. In August of 2011, the majority headed down the road to default for the first time in our history by threatening to default on our debts. Despite the opportunity to reach a compromise with the administration, the majority played a zero-sum political game that has consequences, and because of their actions, August 2011 was the worst month for job creation in 3 years. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged 2,000 points, and our nation's credit rating was downgraded for the very first time. The effects were very real and very dangerous. A responsible legislative body would never head down that road again a second time, but that's exactly what we're doing here today. For more than 225 years, this chamber has been dedicated to preserving the order and stability of our government, even in the most partisan of times. Despite their differences, generation after generation of legislators has known that when it comes to the integrity of our nation, we must succeed together or else fall alone. Dangerously, in the last 2 years, the majority has taken step after step to undermine the central pillar of our government, including the proposal that they put forward today. We've frequently done so through closed legislative process, and while the majority states today's legislation is moving forward under a structured rule, it is only structured for the members of the majority. For the second time this week, the majority is bringing forth a rule that denies consideration of a single Democrat amendment. As a result, we debate a dangerous proposal and one that puts the interests of China before the welfare of the American people and the economic stability of the United States. Yesterday, the Speaker of the House was asked if the proposal laid before us would indeed pay China before paying U.S. troops. He admitted that it would and said, quote, "Listen, those who have loaned us money, like in any other proceeding, if you will, court proceeding, the bondholders paid first. Same thing here," unquote. That simple statement tells us what we need to know. I refuse to put China's interest before the interests of the American people, and I refuse to sit silently as the majority moves us one step closer to default. I urge my colleagues to please vote no on today's rule and the underlying legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.